Peaceful protests by the concerned parents of Epping have paid off, and now their local council has won a case at the High Court against the Home Office, forcing the Bell Hotel to close its doors to the foreign criminals they've been stockpiling there for a rainy day. However, before we prematurely celebrate, this was only won on a technicality about planning permissions and planning laws, and I think this is going to kick Angela Rayner's Operation Scatter into overdrive. If you're not familiar with that, it's the plan to disperse across the country these fighting-age males in houses of multiple occupancy, taking them out of hotels and putting them in your neighbourhoods to ensure that every district in the UK gets their equitable share of asylum seekers, illegal migrants. So this is the ruling as reported by the BBC. And in here, there's an interesting quote from the lawyer. This is Edward Brown, KC, who's acting on behalf of the government, who said that any injunction could lead to other councils making similar applications. Quote, that would aggravate the pressures on the asylum estate. So not only is the government's argument that the asylum system, the means by which foreign criminals are battery farmed in 4-star accommodation at our expense, is now a permanent institution that will be there presumably until the sun devours the earth, much like the NHS. But also, it is not that this is a temporary solution to a temporary problem they're looking to solve. Instead, the purpose of a system is what it does. And the purpose of the asylum estate is to house these men near you and your children. Because they are terrified that now other councils will take similar action based on this precedent. So they only opposed this, sending a lawyer on behalf of the Home Secretary and the Home Office, so that these men would not be relocated elsewhere, away from a school where at least one has committed, allegedly, a sexual act against a child, and another has been charged with, let's say, another indecent act on a man. And so this is betrayed down the bottom. This sort of shell game with these foreign criminals is betrayed down the bottom of this article, because there is a comment here from Imran Hussein from the Refugee Council. I wonder why Mr. Imran Hussein wants all these men from the Middle East and North Africa in my country. And he says, we think asylum seekers should not be in hotels. There are cheaper, better ways of supporting people, and we think the government should end the use of hotels as fast as it can. Now, before you think brilliant, Imran Hussein is chartering flights back to central Mogadishu for all of these illegal migrants. No. He said, such migrants should be in dispersal accommodation around the country, as it was more cost-effective, and it wanted the government to work with local authorities to go back to that kind of system and not use hotels. Translation, he wants them housed next to you and your family. I don't care if it saves us money. I do not want any of these men here. They should not be rewarded by being housed at my expense for breaking the law. The first thing they did in this country was to break the law. And also, being frank, if they came legally, it would not make them good neighbours. I think we should shut our doors legally. Legal migration is as much a problem as illegal migration, if not more so because of the scale. However, it is an injustice to reward these lawbreakers with housing of any kind, hotels or dispersed accommodation, for breaking the law. And it is even more risky to house them in decentralized locations across neighborhoods where, as we've already seen, they'll be loitering near schools or hiding in dark alleys waiting to prey on children. And this reporting by The Telegraph has another quote, again, from someone from the Refugee Council, because, of course, we have to consult people who want to demolish our borders and destroy our country anytime we do a sensible measure on behalf of border policy. And the chap here is Enver Solomon. He's the chief executive of the Refugee Council, and said the ruling should signal the end of the use of hotels to house asylum seekers. Quote, everyone agrees the hotels are the wrong answer. They cost the taxpayer billions, trap people in limbo, and are flashpoints in communities. Through our frontline work, we see our protests and hostility leave people who have fled war and persecution feeling terrified and targeted in the very places they are forced to live. This makes an already traumatizing situation worse and prevents people from feeling safe. Instead of using costly hotels, the government should partner with local councils to provide safe, cost-effective accommodation within communities. First of all, these men are not fleeing war and conflict. If you're a man fleeing war and leaving your women and children behind, you're a coward. But also, we know, via the videos that they have been shown by the people smugglers who they are paying to ferry them across, these videos featuring footage of our women and girls dressed immodestly by Muslim standards, drunk and filmed without their consent on nights out, but also footage of ISIS fighters in the back of pickup trucks with machine guns, and footage of men holding Kalashnikovs and burning churches, we know they are not here to work and obey the law. We know that many of them are here for some form of conquest. Now, that does not mean all of them. Perhaps this chap is nice, but perhaps, right? Perhaps we can take him at his word, because the Daily Mirror and ITV have found one asylum seeker at the Bell Hotel, fluent in English. This guy is Kadar Mohammed. He's 24, from Somalia, if you couldn't tell, who fled his village of Elba in 2022 after Al-Shabaab, the Islamic terror organization, killed his sister for apostasy after she was forced into an arranged marriage, and then he was conscripted into their ranks to preach the Quran, and he said he had a fingernail removed and he was slashed in the arm with a knife. If all of this is true, and of course I'm not inclined to take a criminal at his word, because, the first thing he did was break our laws by breaking into the country, but if all of this is true, it's awful. But we can't take every single person from around the world, because there are so many horrible countries that are made horrible by the people living there, that we just become human grain silos. And is it worth the risk to trust that he is telling the truth? I would say no. He says in here, he travelled on a boat which left Dunkirk at 3 a.m. on the 11th of May, carrying 70 migrants, and paid people smugglers £800 for their help. He added, "I'm happy that my application for asylum has been accepted, but I don't know what is going to happen next to me or all the people inside the Bell Hotel." Now, this article notes he travelled to Turkey. So he went from Somalia, and then he went to Turkey, then to Greece, and then to Austria, where he worked washing dishes, and finally got to the UK 3 months ago. If you were living and working safely in Austria, why were you here? Why did you shop around and travel through multiple Mediterranean and European countries before arriving in the UK? It's because you wanted our benefits. You were, quote-unquote, safe for years. You should not be allowed to do this. You should actually have to, if you are legitimately seeking asylum, seek asylum in a neighbouring country, or at least a country in your continent of origin. And we should not have to put up with this. Even if this one chap has a legitimate claim, it is not worth it. And so the ITV actually interviewed him, and he said to ITV, "Please don't move us. If you move us, everyone will want to do the same to us. I'm not here to harm anybody. I'm here to look for safety." It's like, please don't move us. If you move us, everyone will want to do the same to us. Yeah, that's the point. You should go home. Or you should go to a safe country in the region you came from. Because we should not, as British taxpayers, be housing you indefinitely at our expense, knowing you will never contribute positively to this country, and most likely, you and your descendants will be a net fiscal drain and commit higher rates of crime. And that is not an exaggeration, by the way. Channel migrants themselves are 24 times more likely to go to prison than a native Briton. This is analysis conducted by the Times, and the overall immigrant population of the UK is 0.18%, the rate for citizens in jail, slightly higher than the average for Britons at 0.14%. However, the rate is significantly higher for the nationalities who make up the largest small boat arrivals, including Somalians, Afghanis, Iraqis, Albanians, and Iranians. The analysis by the Conservative Party, published in the Times, suggests that hundreds of migrants who arrive on small boats this year are likely to be jailed. According to the research, some 3.4% of small boat migrants could go to prison, a rate that's 24 times higher than the average for British citizens, and 18 times more likely than the average migrant in the UK. It would mean 700 migrants who arrived on small boats this year could end up in prison if the rate is applied to the 20,422 people who have crossed the Channel so far this year. So let's say at least 1,400, because it's about double that number. About 50,000 have come in since Keir Starmer took power in July. Let's say that 50,000 people come in. That's going to be 1,400 foreign criminals just added to our prison population, which prisons already being run by Islamic gangs called the Muslim Brotherhood, and places like Belmarsh have been said to be by former inmates just jihadi training camps. And then all the rest, the other 49,000 that we're also having to pay for living in hotels or houses of multiple occupancy. No, we shouldn't have to put up with any of this, actually. The risk is far too great. They add nothing, they detract a lot, and the longer they're here, the more crimes that they commit. And none of them should be here, especially those at the Bell Hotel. Because as it turns out in this Q&A that the Telegraph have run about the precedent set by the Bell Hotel, if you go down, what crimes are alleged to have been committed by Bell Hotel migrants? 3 residents are currently facing criminal charges. There is Hadash Gerbalaze Kabatu, 41, who's the Ethiopian chap who was arrested after allegedly assaulting a schoolgirl on the 7th of July, just days after arriving in Britain. And this is the case that prompted the protests in the first place. Mr. Justice Erie's judgment on the hotel also referenced the arrest of 2 other residents. This has been revealed during the High Court ruling. Last month, Rawand Abdulri, 36, was charged with arson and intent to endanger life over an incident that took place at the hotel on April the 5th. And Abdulri was also charged with the same offence in relation to a separate fire at the Phoenix Hotel, another migrant hotel nearby, on the 28th of March. So he's just a serial arsonist we let in this country and are paying to stay at this hotel. And then Mohammed Sharak, who is another resident at the Bell Hotel, is accused of kissing a man on the neck on the 25th of July. Must have mistook Essex for Brighton. In court last week, he denied a charge of sexually assaulting a man aged over 16 by touching him in a sexual way without consent. Why are any of these people here? Because the government wants them to be, is the answer to that, of course. So, there's another reason they're here as well, and this is the legalistic argument. So here's a question. What is Yvette Cooper's statutory duty to asylum seekers on accommodation? The Home Secretary is required to provide accommodation and subsistence support to all destitute asylum seekers while their claims are being decided. These legal obligations are set out under the Immigration and Asylum Act of 1999. Support under Section 95 of the Act is provided for people waiting for a decision on their asylum claim or appeal. Section 98 support is provided while a person's eligibility for Section 95 asylum support is being considered. Okay, repeal that law. Repeal the Human Rights Act that allows them to constantly frustrate the deportations process with appeals to Article 2 and Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Either reform or leave the UN Refugee Convention of 1952. At least reform it to say that refugees have to seek assistance in their continent of origin. Get rid of all these laws if you really want this problem solved. But actually, of course, the government don't want this problem solved because they are inveterate traitors and fully bought up and paid up ideologues dedicated to the fantasy of universal human rights. And so repealing said laws to actually get anything done is beyond the question for them. And so we just have to house foreign sex offenders at our expense forever, apparently. And they wonder why people have turned to protests and appeals to the High Court to get anything done here. So there's a question here, what will the government do next? And this is what they're properly afraid of, right? Lawyers representing Miss Cooper made a last-minute legal application to intervene in the case ahead of the judgment. Mr. Justice Erie rejected the application. Angela Eagle, the Border Security Minister, said the government would carefully consider this judgment, adding, as this matter remains subject to ongoing legal proceedings, it would be inappropriate to comment further at the stage. However, lawyers for the Home Office confirmed they would seek to appeal against the injunction. So they're still going to fight the hotel closure, even though the ruling has been made, because they just want these criminals, some seem to be convicted, others alleged, they want them housed in this hotel near your schools and families. That is what the government wants. Now, does this set a precedent for a kind of domino effect of lawsuits across the country? Because that's what they're afraid of. And this is reporting for the BBC, says that all 12 reform-controlled councils are now going to, quote, do everything in their power to follow Epping's lead, according to Nigel Farage, which is encouraging, actually having some action taken by Reform UK. They've been a bit flip-floppy on their rhetoric, but to see tangible action taken on this, that's a good start. We've also seen Robert Jenrick try and corral a group called Lawyers for Borders to take action and participate in these sort of lawsuits, even though there's infighting. Of course, spats between Robert Jenrick and Nigel Farage. It would be good if their combined efforts, even if they weren't working together, if they're working in tandem, separately, get some action on this stuff. Rupert Lowe, as well, helped Great Yarmouth Council and encouraged them to fight the allocation of hotels in Great Yarmouth to be asylum accommodation because it violated their travel and tourism plans. And so this sort of stuff is quite encouraging. There's apparently a Tory-run council as well called Broxburn, and it was the first local authority to declare it was seeking legal advice as a matter of urgency about whether it could take similar action to Epping. This is all very good. But before we celebrate, let's look at the specific statute that was cited in the case that allowed the Bell Hotel in Epping to be closed. And this is Stephen Swinford. He's political editor at the Times. At the Bell Hotel, the ruling came down to the Town and Country Planning Act of, and he puts 1987, I think it should be 1947 there. Epping Forest Council argued that the owner of the hotel had failed to apply for planning permission for what was a material change of use. What was once a venue for weddings and conferences was turned over exclusively to the use of 138 male asylum seekers. The judge blocked attempts by the Home Office to intervene, arguing that it was not relevant in what was ostensibly a planning law problem. So this is a victory via bureaucracy. This is not us solving the problem and setting precedent on principle that these foreign criminals should not be here. We are having to jump through circus hoops of legal loopholes here in order to remove foreign criminals from our country. And so, if the proper planning applications have been made by other hotels and hotel chains or houses of multiple occupancy, this will not be an argument that we can use, or the other councils can use, to evict these foreign criminals from their localities. Unless the government is willing to repeal all of these laws, basically bankrupting their best friends in the lefty human rights lawyer grift, which they're not, these men will be in our country committing crimes until a different government succeeds them and perhaps is willing to remove these laws. And we're seeing rumblings among Reform, the Conservatives, Restore Britain, whatever other nascent national conservative political movements are growing, that they understand this is the problem and that this is what must be done. But for the next few years, at least, unless the politically unthinkable happens, we have a snap election very suddenly, we're going to be stuck with this problem for ages, because Labour are not willing to repeal the laws that would address the problem, and so they want the problem to continue. And this is best summed up by Dan Jarvis, who's a Home Office minister, and he was asked multiple times in interviews, and this was yesterday on the 20th of August, whether or not these men would be relocated to another hotel. And he was unable to confirm. He was speaking to Sky News, and he said, the use of hotels is not a long-term sustainable arrangement. In an interview with Times Radio, he said he failed 5 times to say where the Epping migrants would be relocated to. When he was asked about Nigel Farage as well, obviously Farage saying that Epping now sets a precedent that Reform are going to use and follow, he said, I haven't read Mr. Farage's op-ed, but I've always thought that the best politicians try to bring people together and the very worst politicians always try to drive them apart. I don't want to be brought together with foreign criminals and sex offenders, Dan, but for some reason, you're insistent on pressing our faces together and forcing us to kiss, like that cartoon frog playing with his dolls. I do not want to live alongside foreign criminals. For some reason, seemingly the ideology of universal human rights that says that underneath we're all blank slates and it is the government's job to reveal to us this latent egalitarian nature. For some reason, probably that one, you want these foreign criminals around homes and around schools. And so, the government has made an appeal for 5,000 homes to house 20,000 migrants. So there are going to be houses of multiple occupancy procured by my and your money in the midst of a housing crisis where young people themselves can't get homes. So they are going to be taxed at exorbitant rates to house foreign criminals at their expense in the homes that they could otherwise buy. These are going to be procured by the likes of Serco, which are security contractors, the kind of henchmen for ethnic and cultural displacement against the English. Anyone who takes these contracts is an absolute traitor. This urgent appeal has come after the High Court ruling. So their solution to the potential precedent being set by Epping to evict these foreign criminals from hotels is to now house them in houses of multiple occupancy indiscriminately around the country so that we each get our equitable share in our towns and cities of these fighting age males who will just mill about and leer at school children at school gates. This is the plan by the government. This is what they're trying to force upon us. The hunt for alternative accommodation is part of Labour's pledge to end the use of hotels for asylum seekers by the close of this Parliament in 2029. 200 hotels are being used by the Home Office to house more than 32,000 asylum seekers, a similar number to summer 2024, after Labour was forced to find accommodation for the record 27,997 migrants who crossed the Channel so far in 2025. And so they are trying to plug all the gaps in their sinking ship, but they're they're unwilling to right the ship by getting rid of the laws that brings these people here in the first place, mainly because Keir Starmer wrote the 1998 human rights law textbook to tell lawyers, particularly immigration lawyers, how to apply the ECHR in their immigration appeals cases. Now, again, it says 27,997 migrants have crossed since Labour took power. That's only recorded. That's not counting today. It's been so far in 2025. That's not counting the other 23,000 odd that have come in since Keir Starmer himself took power, repealed the terrible, but nonetheless deterrent, Rwanda deportation scheme, and basically encouraged every single people smuggler around the world to ferry people straight into Britain, to where even treacherous frog Emmanuel Macron is saying, guys, your welfare system is acting as a draw for all of these Muslims and Africans to sweep across Europe committing crimes until they eventually rock up at the cliffs of Dover and become as British as you and me. Please stop. So a Home Office spokesman in here has said, this government has consistently said the use of hotels to house asylum seekers is neither sustainable nor suitable as a long-term approach. We remain committed to working with our partners to identify more suitable and cost-effective alternatives. I have an idea. Deport them all. Ryanair flights are cheap, but you won't do that, will you? Because you want them here in the first place. Apparently, in order to solve this problem for the houses of multiple occupancy, the Home Office lifted a cap on contingency accommodation, like RAF bases, like Wethersfield, from 800 to 1,225 migrants per site. So we're just going to have like army barracks full of fighting-age men from places of the world where they run jihadist training camps, and that's apparently not an issue at all to the government of the day. And this is what Angela Rayner dubbed, infamously, last year, in August of last year, month after the election, Operation Scatter, housing these foreign criminals in military barracks like RAF Scampton or RAF Wethersfield until they can house them in houses of multiple occupancy in areas across the country. And it says in the original report, Labour is preparing to end the use of large military sites to house asylum seekers and will instead scatter migrants around the country to cut pressure on local services. The government has struck agreements with councils on the number of asylum seekers who will be settled in their area as it moves away from the use of sites such as former RAF Wethersfield, they've just now expanded, and RAF Scrampton to house those arriving in Britain. It is preparing to, quote, massively increase the procurement of dispersed accommodation, so houses that you and I could otherwise buy, such as empty homes or former student blocks that have self-catering facilities. Let's get some numbers on this from the Oxford Migration Observatory. So this is people crossing the channel in small boats, and it says that 37,000 people were detected crossing the English Channel in 2024, 25% more than the year before, but fewer than in 2022. But in 2025, we have had year-on-year record increases. And then we found that from 2018 to 2024, 6 countries, Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, Albania, and Syria, have made up 70% of those crossing in small boats. Right, so the majority Muslim men from regions of the world where they have jihadist training camps, and only the Albanians have been returned due to the returns agreement that we can negotiate because they're in the European Union. And then it says, between 2018 and 2024, the asylum grant rate for people who arrived by small boats was 68%, higher than the grant rate for all asylum applicants. So, when Yvette Cooper says, we're going to clear the asylum backlog, they do not mean deportations. They do not mean accurately assessing whether or not these foreign criminals should be in our country in the first place. What they mean is expediting the rate at which their visas are rubber stamped and they get indefinite leave to remain in this country forever. They can then claim social housing, benefits, access the NHS, and eventually go on to get British citizenship and become, via paperwork, indistinguishable from the native host majority, and then blend seamlessly into the statistics when they commit a crime, so it looks like suddenly the crime rate for British nationals has gone up when it's actually these men, whose first act was to break into the country in the first place, and for which they were rewarded. And that is because, ultimately, again, the government wants these people here. If they didn't want these people here, they would repeal the laws keeping them here. Because they don't, you can only conclude they want this to continue. And here's some facts about the asylum accommodation itself. This is under the subheading, Asylum seekers have become more evenly distributed across local authorities in recent years. So you can see Operation Scatter has already begun underway. It says, on the 31st of March 2014, 75% of local authorities, housed no asylum seekers. That's 285 out of 375 total. However, by the end of March 2025, just 16% of local authorities hosted none, 59 of 361. So where the local authorities have shrunk, and also more have decided to take the blood money from the central government to house these foreign criminals in hotels and HMOs near schools and families, pretty much everywhere has these. There are few corners left of our country that have not been ravaged by mass immigration and multiculturalism. But don't worry, they're coming for the shires too. It's just a matter of time. I'm getting some more numbers on this that shows the exact areas they'd like to put these people in. One of them is Canterbury, which actually is a source of great sorrow for me because I love visiting Canterbury. I lived there for multiple years. I went to university there, and it was a beautiful little town, and now it's just going to be ruined by more foreign criminals milling about on street corners, making women and children feel very unsafe. That's including also Thanet, Dover, and Folkestone, so all of the quaint Kentish towns where the English still live. The local authorities have pointed to a string of areas in Kent as the worst affected by the £500 million takeover. So they're just giving them a slush fund for private contractors to, again, stockpile foreign criminals in the areas where the English have retreated to because their major cities have become minority English and therefore unrecognisable, lawless, and fundamentally unpleasant. In Bolton, houses of multiple occupancy have gone from 170 to 720 in only a few years. And then looking at the Migration Observatory figures again, the number of migrants in hotels have dropped by around 8,000 from 46,000 at the end of 2022 to 38,000 at the end of 2024. But that's only because they've been housed in dispersal accommodation in our neighbourhoods, surging by 10,000 from 56,000 to 66,000 over the same period. So what's the solution then? Well, I go with Restore Britain on this. Use tents at discarded military barracks, repeal all of the human rights laws and the 1999 Asylum Act that forces we, the British taxpayer, via our government, to pay for the legal aid, the housing, the spending money for all of these foreign criminals, house them for a very short amount of time in these military barracks and in tents. If it's good enough for them to stay in Calais, it's good enough for them to stay here, until such a time where we can expedite their deportation and make it very swift. Make sure they are uncomfortable, make sure they are detained, make sure they are deported, and make sure they are permanently inadmissible back to the UK, because we can take their prints, take an imprint of their teeth, take their name, and try and get their official documents out of them. And if we do not get their official documents out of them, we can set up a third-party deportation scheme with a sufficiently hostile country, or even use the Ascension Islands or the island of Pitcairn, a sort of windswept place in the middle of nowhere that is still British-controlled territory, to house these foreign criminals. We should not be putting them up in four-star hotels at our expense, and we should not be appealing to the Town and Country Planning Act of 1947 just to get a few of them out of one hotel and into houses near our families.